We are going to work some homework problems now. Hopefully this will help you with your homework. This is number 1. We're not completing the square here. We're just going to factor. And sometimes people forget how to factor when you just have these two terms here. Well, what you do is look for the greatest common factor and pull that out. Both these terms have an x. So we have x times x minus 8 equals 0. And then remember, the whole point is we have this very nice zero product property. This is why we factor, because now we can set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So either x equals 0 or x minus 8 equals 0. So my solution is simply x equals 0 or 8. Two solutions. So that's work that we've done before. Now, this is just using the square root property. Don't forget, there's going to be possibly two answers because we say x equals plus or minus the square root of 1, which means x equals plus or minus 1. So our solution is x equal negative 1 or 1. Now, another way to do this, to be very careful, is to put it in standard form. Standard form is when we have 0 on this side and all the other terms on the left-hand side. And then remember that this factors as the difference of squares. That's a minus sign there. So now it's clear that there's going to be two solutions, either x plus 1 equals 0 or x minus 1 equals 0, and we get the same answer. So don't forget, the square root property gives you this plus or minus business here. Very important and very often forgotten. Oh dear, now we're getting into something more complicated. This is still just going to be solved by using the square root property. We don't have to complete the square yet. Let me show you why. Okay, what I'm going to do is isolate the squared term on the left-hand side. I write LHS, left-hand side. So how do I do that? Well, first I need to add 5 to both sides. And I get this equivalent equation, 2 times this binomial squared equals 72. Now, we have to isolate that. What does that mean? It means divide by 2, get rid of that coefficient. So what are we looking at? X plus 6 equals 36. Okay, so I've isolated this squared term on the left-hand side. I have a number on the right-hand side. Now I can use the square root property. We know this means x plus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 36. So x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Now we just need to figure out what that looks like. So either x equals negative 6 plus 6, or x equals negative 6 minus 6. In this case, we get x equals 0. In this case, we get x equals negative 12. And those are my two solutions. So when you already have your variable as a binomial squared, you can use the square root property. You don't want to multiply all this out and then have to complete the square. It's already done for you in disguise. Okay, so now we're going to have to complete the square. Complete the square. Notice that A does not equal 1. So we're going to have to deal with that. First thing I'm going to do is get this 9 on the other side. So I have 2x squared plus 4x equals 9. Now we need to divide by 2. So divide every term by 2 to get x squared plus 2x equals 9/2. Now I'm going to rewrite this. X squared plus 2x plus something equals something plus 9/2. I need to add something over here to the left-hand side to turn this into a perfect square. And if I add it here, I have to add it here. So what is the thing I add? 1/2 b squared. What is b? B is the number 2, the coefficient of x. Well, isn't that just going to be 1? So now, what am I looking at? Let's go up here. I have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 1 plus 9/2. Now, I need to write that as one fraction. So isn't that, this is equivalent to 1. Getting a common denominator, this will be 11/2. All right, so this is a perfect square trinomial, and it equals 11/2. So let's get a new page and continue. Let's continue over here. So we have x plus 1 squared equals 11/2. We use the square root property. We know that this means x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 11/2. Now, we're going to write that a little differently. X plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 11 divided by the square root of 2. Now we're solving for x. So what does that mean? Well, subtract 1 from both sides. X equals -1 plus the square root of 11 over the square root of 2, or x equals -1 minus the square root of 11 over the square root of 2. Now, these are not acceptable answers. We want one term. So if you try to enter that in WebAssign, it's going to say, nope. So let's look at this one. What do we need to do? We need to get a common denominator of, first, the square root of 2. So you need to multiply -1 times square root of 2 over 2. So now I see that x equals the negative square root of 2 plus square root of 11 all over the square root of 2. And again, this is not acceptable. Why? Because we need to rationalize this denominator. How do we do that? We multiply by the square root of 2 to turn that denominator into a integer. So what happens now? Be very careful. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is simply 2. Where you need to be particularly careful is multiplying the numerator. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 2, but we have a minus sign, so this is minus 2. And then I have the square root of 11 times the square root of 2. That's the square root of 22. So that is one of my answers. What is the other answer going to be? Well, it will come from this term. It will look very similar. It will be x equals minus 2 minus the square root of 22 over 2. So there's a lot of extra work in this problem. Getting to this point is pretty easy, but then you have to get down to this point where you have your two answers in the proper form. We won't do a whole lot of this, but it is important to be able to do it. Okay, number 9. So, caution. We have to do something first. This is not set up for us to solve because we don't have 0 on one side, even though this is factored. Yeah, you might think that we're ready to go, but this is not 0. So what are we going to do? We have to multiply this out. So the first step is to say n squared plus 18n equals negative 6. Now we can complete the square. So let's rewrite this. N squared plus 18n plus something that we have to figure out equals that same number minus 6. So remember, how do we figure out what this is? To turn the left-hand side, turn this into a perfect square. I need 1/2 times b squared. What is b? b is 18. So this will be 1/2 times 18 squared, which is what? This is 9 squared, right? 81. So now what are we looking at? We have, let's sort of make some separate space over here. This is a perfect square trinomial, right? N plus 9 squared equals, well, 81 minus 6 is 75. Now we're ready to use the square root property. So n plus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 75. And now I can say n equals negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 75. Funny thing, because WebAssign accepted this answer when I put it in there. But if we think about the square root of 75, isn't there a perfect square hiding in there? Isn't that the square root of 25 times 3? So wouldn't that be 5 times the square root of 3? Just to be clear, I'm going to reduce that radical and write my answers as n equals negative 9 plus 5 times the square root of 3, comma, negative 9 minus 5 times the square root of 3. But WebAssign did accept my square root of 75. I don't know why. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. So just be on the lookout for that. All right, our last problem. Yay. But it looks like a messy one. See, again, you got to use caution. You might say, look, it's already factored. But what's the problem? This is not 0. We cannot solve this unless we have factored on one side and 0 on the other. So we're going to have to multiply this out. We're going to have to be careful. So use FOIL. We get x squared for the first. Outer will be plus 6x. Inner minus 3x last minus 18 equals -8. Now, I'm anticipating that we complete the square, but we can use any method we want. So let's see what this looks like. X squared plus 3x. If I turn this into a 0 over here, then this will give me minus 10 equals 0. Does this factor? Can we factor this? You might think about it for a while. 10 equals, well, the factors of 10 are 1, 2, 5, and 10. That looks like a candidate. Let's try it. X, we're going to need a plus and a minus. How about plus 5 minus 2 equals 0? Does that work? I would get x squared plus 5x minus 2x. Yeah, that seems to work. So let's see if these are the answers. You can check by putting them in here, and you will find that they are correct. Could we have completed the square? Yes. So let's do that just so in case you want to know, we'll do it. We decided to complete the square. So we would get to this step and we would say this is x squared plus 3x. We want to put this 18 on the other side. So that would be adding 18 to both sides. That gives me 10. So now I'm going to complete the square. Going to be more work, but it's going to be a good exercise. What do we want to put here? We need 1/2 b squared. You'll run into this situation at some point. So this is going to be b divided by 2 squared. This is 9/4. And you're already groaning, I know, because we got a fraction here now, and that's not fun. So what are we looking at on the left-hand side? Okay, so I have on the left-hand side 9/4 plus 10. How does this thing factor? That's the question that you might find a little troubling. Well, when we complete the square, what we're doing, we will always end up with x plus b over 2 squared. This 1/2 b squared is what goes in our perfect square trinomial. So this is 3/2 b over 2. If you can work this out, you get x squared, and then you would get 3/2 x plus 3/2 x, which equals 3x. And when you square this, you get 9/2. So it looks like we need some more room. So let's get another page. So we got a bit more work to do. We need to combine this. 9/4 plus 10. Well, we need a common denominator of 4. So multiply 10 by 4 over 4. This now looks like x plus 3/2 squared equals, well, this is 9 plus 40 over 4. So 49 over 4. So you're probably wondering, how in the world is this going to give us the same answer? Well, let's see if it does. We're ready to use the square root property. We know that this means x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 49/4. Well, what can we do to this? This is plus or minus the square root of 49 over the square root of 2, which in turn is equal to plus or minus, square root of 4, don't get ahead of myself, which is plus or minus 7 halves. So x equals negative 3 halves plus or minus 7 halves. Now, where is this going to take us? Well, one answer is x equals negative 3 halves plus 7 halves. What is that? That is negative 3 plus 7 divided by 2, which is 4 divided by 2, which is 2. Yippee! The other thing, it equals negative, let's use a different color. The other answer is x equals negative 3 halves minus 7 halves, which will be negative 10 halves, which is negative 5. Now, those were the answers we got. This was a lot more work. Why did I do it? To show you that it will always work. Completing the square will always work, even when it does factor. So keep it in mind. If you get stuck factoring, fall back to completing the square. So let me know if you need more examples, and good luck with the homework. And let me know if you have any questions. So bye for now.